So welcome to the Fry family home. This house was built by Jacob and Elizabeth Fry in 1815 to 1816. Jacob and Elizabeth were both Mennonites who came up from Pennsylvania in around 1799 in order to escape having to be involved in any of the conflicts and wars that were going on in America at the time. When they first arrived here in Canada, they had to build a log home or a home that they could settle in before building a more permanent residence in brick. So this home was their first, and they built it on Fly Road near Vineland. The house itself is built in a traditional medieval style architecture, which we believe to be the last surviving type of house and building in this style in Canada. The house itself was moved from its location on Fly Road to its current location here at the museum grounds in 1959. A group of volunteers decided that this was a historic building of great importance, and so they actually lifted the whole house off of the foundation and moved it here to the museum site. When they actually managed to squeeze it through where two houses are here, unfortunately they couldn't turn it around, so we're actually looking at the back of the house. So once it was placed here, it no longer could be moved, and that's where its current location is today. So let's go into the front of the house. So we enter through the Küche, which is the German word for kitchen, and this is where a lot of the family's work would have been done. Primarily the wife, Elizabeth Wismer, would have been working really hard in here to take care of her family. So she would have been cooking, taking care of her children. There's also, if you can notice, a wash station. So this would have been where the family had all of their water. The water would have had to have been drawn from a well and then stored here in buckets for washing. And the youngest child would have had the responsibility of going to get the water from the well using a yoke and the buckets. If we go through here, this is actually where the family would have done a lot of their living. So the men would have sat on the one side of the table so that they could lean against the wall after a hard day's work out at the farm. And the women would have sat on the other side of the table so that they could get up quickly in order to tend to the fire or in order to get other kinds of food. This is a really ingenious contraption here that we see on the ceiling. So this is actually called a Betty lamp. There is an oil lamp at the bottom, and this mechanism here can be moved around the room so that there's light in any spot of the room. So you can actually shift this and move it around the room. And then of course you can also lower and heighten the lamp so you can get different light at different working speeds. The family would have used primarily crockery, but something that's very interesting about the Fry family is that they were quite wealthy. So they actually had horn cups. Cups made of horn were kind of a status item, something that deteriorates quite quickly based off of comparatively to ceramic. And the fact that they had horn cups kind of symbolizes that they were of high enough status that they could spend money on something so lavish as a horn cup. We also have a really interesting piece called our grandfather clock. So the body of the clock was made here locally, we believe, but the face of the clock and the inner mechanisms were actually brought from Germany. So as you can imagine, coming over from Germany on a ship, it would have been really difficult to bring this entire clock, including its body. But they did decide to bring the face of the clock, which would have been really valuable, as well as the inner mechanisms. And once they got to Canada, they would have had a new clock body built, either by a cabinet maker or possibly by Jacob himself, who was a cabinet maker. So this is actually one of the more interesting pieces in this room. So this is called a mammy chair. Now, you might notice that there's a kind of funny looking gate on one side, and that's actually for where you would place your baby or small child when they were sleeping. And then Elizabeth would have sat here and done, needlework or spinning, because of course a woman's work was never finished. So she could rock the baby to sleep, but also keep doing work. She could also tend to the fire or keep an eye on the rest of her family. So this is what the mammy chair is all about. So it's basically a cradle and a chair all in one. So let's go into the main bedroom. So this would have been where Jacob and Elizabeth slept. Now you can notice that the beds are rope beds, so that means that the beds have actually been supported with rope, and then they have a straw-filled mattress that sits on top. Underneath there's a trundle bed, so the trundle bed can be moved from underneath out, but this was only really used for very, very sick children to keep watch of them at night. Most of the time the children would have slept upstairs. So there were very few pieces of clothing that people owned back in this time. So they would have had to air out their clothing every night. Mennonites didn't do a lot of actual washing of the clothes. They practiced more of a purification process. So that's just taking your clothing off and airing it out, and kind of just letting it air out. So they would have done that on the pegs behind their bed here. And if we go over here, you can see this beautiful cupboard here, and above it is a money chest. So all their important documents and all their money would have been kept in there. And because they don't use banks, of course, it had to be fairly sturdy, so that's where they would have kept all of their valuable possessions. Now let's continue on through to our dowdy house. So when Jacob's son Samuel decided to marry Anna Nash, the family had transferred the home to Samuel, and Samuel moved into the main bedroom. That left Jacob and his new wife Maria to move into a different part of the house to give them some privacy. So this extension was built called the dowdy house, and that's basically like an in-law suite. So we believe that this was actually originally divided into 2 rooms. You can kind of see evidence of that on the wall where there would have been a partition wall going this way. So we think that this would have been a bedroom, and then possibly this would have been a sitting room or a parlor. And eventually, when Samuel started his weaving business, we also believe that this room was temporarily used as a loom room, or where his business would have had his production. So we have evidence of that based on a really cool poster that we have from the period advertising Samuel's services in 1836. So he talks about how he can produce diapers and coverlets produced at the house of Jacob Frey. So that means he did have his workshop in the house for a certain period of time, but eventually he would have moved to a larger location so that he could produce more things for his business. So if we go to the second floor, this is where the children would have slept and where a lot of the family kept their farming tools for storage. So this first room is the girls' room. So all of the girls would have slept in here. It's fairly the nicest room in the house because it's got nice closed doors. So when any guests or special people came to the house, they would have stayed in this room, and the girls would have moved to where the boys slept. Because they were practicing Mennonites for most of this period, girls and boys were kept separate. And we have our boys' room right through here. So the boys would have slept in this room, and they also slept many to a bed. So most beds were very, very expensive. They cost about the same price as the family's best cow. But also, it's very cold in here in the winter. So the kids would have slept 3 to 4 to a bed for warmth and also for economy. So there's actually stories from primary source accounts that talk about how there was frost on the coverlets when they woke up in the morning. So you can imagine how cold it would have been, and obviously snuggling into your brothers would have helped you keep warm. There is also evidence that this part of the house was formerly had a wall to create a very small room, which we think was called the tramp room. So this was any kind of traveling person that the family did not know, but because they believed in Christian charity and helping people in need, they would have offered this small room to anyone who was traveling by. But also it kept them separate from the children, of course, that were sleeping nearby in these other 2 rooms. As I mentioned, this was also used for tool storage. So the family would have kept all of their tools that they weren't using and different farming equipment here, as well as other maybe weaving tools. And we can see evidence of the family throughout the house, but my favorite part is actually here on the stairs that lead up to the second attic. So you can see the names EF. So that stands for Elias Fry, carved into here, as well as some hex signs. And hex signs were used by Mennonites. It's a very interesting kind of practice because, of course, they were a Christian tradition, but this is almost like a pagan symbolism sort of tradition where they believed carving these different signs offered some kind of protection. So they might carve them often in barns to prevent fire or to dissuade, malintent or evil spirits. And so you can find these signs actually carved throughout the house, but also in other structures like it in our area. Thanks for visiting. We hope you enjoyed your tour of the Fry House.